My name is Charlotte, and I'm 37 years old. For as long as I can remember, my life has been a study in contrasts, a series of stark differences between the family who birthed me and the family who truly raised me. My parents, Linda and Richard, were already in their late 40s when I came into the world, an unplanned surprise that tilted the careful balance of their lives. My older sister, Veronica, was 10 years my senior, their pride and joy, the child they'd poured all their dreams into. From the very beginning, my mother would remind me, in a tone both casual and piercing, that they never planned for a second child. She'd say it offhandedly while helping Veronica fill out college applications or shuttling her to violin lessons. "We already had Veronica, and she was enough," she'd say, smiling as though it were merely a fact and not a knife twisting in my chest. I was the extra piece that didn't fit into their puzzle, the burden they hadn't requested. But my maternal grandparents, Henry and Elaine, saw things differently. If it weren't for their persistence, I might not have existed at all. My parents made it plain that raising another child wasn't part of their life plan, but my grandparents begged them not to fix the problem, as my mother once coldly described it. In those early years, my grandparents' house became my real home. Every morning, as my father dropped me off on his way to work, he'd jingle his car keys and tell my grandfather, "Well, Frank, you wanted her. She's all yours." Those words stung. But once I stepped inside my grandparents' modest house, it was as though the weight lifted from my shoulders. Henry, my grandfather, was a retired math professor, a man who believed numbers never lied. He'd sit with me at the kitchen table, teaching me how numbers could tell the truth even when people couldn't. My grandmother, Elaine, was once a high school English teacher. She'd help me with my homework every afternoon, her patience seemingly endless. She'd tell me, in her steady voice, "Knowledge is the one thing no one can ever take from you." She also taught me to cook, insisting it wasn't just a chore, but a way to show love and creativity. At home, things were very different. My parents were often tired, irritable, and distant. They'd pick me up late at night, sometimes barely speaking to me. Veronica, my sister, acted as though I didn't exist. She wasn't cruel, exactly, just indifferent. I'd sit on the floor playing with my dolls while she sprawled on the couch chatting on the phone about boys, college, and her future. The divide between how they treated Veronica and how they treated me was painfully obvious. My mother's voice would overflow with pride when talking about Veronica. "She's top of her class." Or, "She just got accepted to Columbia." Meanwhile, my own milestones went unnoticed. If I won a spelling bee, my parents were too tired to attend. They'd always say, "You understand, don't you?" So from a very young age, I learned my place. I was the afterthought, the background character in my own family, the invisible daughter my parents hadn't wanted, left to build my own world with the only two people who truly loved me, my grandparents. Despite growing up feeling like an unwelcome guest in my own family, I found my refuge in learning. School became the one place where I felt visible and valued. While my parents showed little interest in my life, my grandparents poured themselves into my education. By the time I was 13, I had become accustomed to coming home and immediately being summoned to chores. "Charlotte," my mother would call the second I stepped through the door. "The bathroom's filthy. Go clean it." What had once been Veronica's chores gradually became mine, along with countless new tasks. I knew the laundry machine cycles better than my own school schedule. Cooking, cleaning, scrubbing floors, those were my responsibilities. One day, when I was 14, my mother simply stopped making dinner. She announced over her coffee cup, "You're old enough to handle this. Dinner needs to be ready when we get home from work." Still, I kept my grades high. My teachers noticed my knack for numbers, especially in math and economics. My grandfather, Henry, saw it too. In the evenings, he'd sit beside me with notebooks full of equations and charts. "You have a gift, Charlotte," he'd say, his eyes twinkling with pride. "Numbers never lie. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I'd sneak off to my room after washing dishes and pore over college websites, imagining campuses far from my hometown and the endless cycle of chores. In those moments, I could almost believe a different life was possible, a life where I wasn't invisible. At 16, the letters started arriving. Thick envelopes from schools I'd only dared to dream about. Wharton, NYU Stern, Columbia. My hands trembled as I tore each one open. I remember the day vividly. Sitting at the dining table, 3 acceptance letters spread out in front of me like trophies. My heart pounded as I shared the news. "That's nice," my mother said, not even looking up from her plate. "But we can't pay for it. We spent everything on your sister's wedding. We even took out loans." I felt my throat tighten. "But you paid for Veronica's college," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "That was different," she replied coolly. "We saw potential in her." My father chimed in, between mouthfuls of food. "You'll have to get a job, save up, and take out loans. That's what responsible adults do." Something in me snapped that night. For the first time, I left the dinner table without asking to be excused. I called my grandmother, sobbing into the phone. When I arrived at my grandparents' house, Henry listened carefully, his brow furrowed in thought. After a silent moment, he stood and disappeared into his study. He returned with a worn leather folder filled with bank statements and certificates of deposit. "Charlotte," he said firmly, "your grandmother and I have been saving for your education since the day you were born. We expected something like this might happen." Relief and shock washed over me. The following night, I packed my things and moved in with my grandparents for good. When I told my parents I was leaving, they hardly glanced away from the TV. "Do whatever you think is best," my mother muttered. I thought I heard relief in her voice. College transformed my world. I enrolled at NYU Stern, focusing on financial analysis. My professors recognized my passion and talent almost immediately. Some invited me to stay after class to discuss complex concepts. For the first time, I felt seen and respected by adults outside my grandparents. Each summer, I landed prestigious internships at major financial institutions. At 22, after graduation, I secured a position at a leading investment firm in Manhattan. My starting salary felt like a fortune to the girl who once cooked dinner every night while dreaming of freedom. Within 5 years, I had risen to a senior role, managing portfolios worth millions and advising high-profile clients. People in the industry began to know my name, associating me with precision and strategic thinking. Every deal I closed, every promotion I earned, felt like proof that my parents had been utterly wrong about me. I'd come a long way from scrubbing bathroom tiles after school. And though my grandparents were the only ones who'd believed in me all along, I intended to prove, to myself most of all, that I was more than just the family's forgotten child. While my career soared, the same could not be said for my sister Veronica. Though my parents had poured everything into her education and lavish wedding, her life began unraveling almost as soon as she stepped into adulthood. Veronica had started out in marketing, full of ambition and ideas. But as years passed, her professional momentum slowed to a crawl. Her husband, Jason, struggled to hold down a steady job. They lived in increasingly smaller apartments, constantly shuffling between new addresses as rent prices rose. I'd hear bits and pieces of their troubles through my grandparents during our weekly phone calls. My grandmother, Elaine, would speak in a hushed voice, as if she were sharing some scandal. "Your mother emptied her retirement fund last month to help Veronica pay rent," she'd say, sighing. "They can't say no to her, Charlotte. They just can't." Each time, my stomach twisted into knots. I felt sad for Veronica, but at the same time, a quiet anger smoldered beneath my sympathy. It was like watching a pattern repeat itself over and over. Veronica stumbled, and my parents scrambled to cushion her fall, no matter the cost. By the time I was 35, things had gotten even worse. Despite my parents' constant financial help, Veronica and Jason simply couldn't keep up. They had twin daughters, Emma and Ava, who were 7 years old and adorable as could be. But raising them only deepened their money troubles. Eventually, my parents did what I once might have considered unthinkable. They let Veronica, Jason, and the twins move back into my old bedroom. My mother described it to me over the phone like it was the most natural thing in the world. We've rearranged the house. The twins are in your old room, and Veronica and Jason are using the guest room. I couldn't help it. I laughed, though there was no humor in it. The same parents who'd pushed me to clean and cook and be invisible had now turned their lives upside down to make room for Veronica's entire family. My grandparents were still alive at that time, though Henry's health had started to falter. One afternoon, during a visit to their house, my grandfather looked at me over his glasses and said, "Your parents are throwing everything away for Veronica, and she'll still keep asking for more. Remember, Charlotte, sometimes love blinds people." It stung because it was true. During that same visit, my grandmother confided that my parents were falling deeper into financial trouble than they were willing to admit. "They're dipping into savings. Your mother took out another loan," she whispered. "All for Veronica and those kids." Meanwhile, my relationship with my parents remained distant and polite. We'd exchange occasional texts or birthday cards, but there was no warmth. I focused instead on my career, saving diligently, investing smartly, and building the life I dreamed about back when I was just a lonely teenager scrubbing floors. Even though my parents' finances were falling apart, they still never asked me for help. Pride, or the belief that I somehow owed them nothing since they'd already written me off years before? I wasn't sure. But I learned from my grandparents that my parents were barely managing to pay their own mortgage while also trying to cover Veronica's family's needs. Medical bills were starting to pile up, especially after my father had a minor heart scare. Yet my parents refused to cut Veronica off, insisting that family comes first. Hearing this made me feel strangely detached. On one hand, I felt pity for the chaos consuming their lives. On the other, I knew I couldn't rush in and save them, especially when I'd spent so much of my life being invisible to them. At this point, my grandparents were the only real bridge between me and my parents. I knew the fragile peace between us couldn't last forever, and though I didn't realize it then, everything was already in motion, setting us on a collision course that would shatter the last fragile threads tying me to my family. Life took a devastating turn when my grandfather, Henry, passed away suddenly from a massive heart attack. It felt like the ground cracked open beneath my feet. He'd been my mentor, my confidant, the man who taught me how to see beauty in numbers and who never let me believe I was less than anyone else. Without him, the world felt strangely hollow. My grandmother, Elaine, seemed to fade almost overnight. The vibrant woman who'd always stood so tall and fierce began shrinking into herself. Less than 2 months after my grandfather's funeral, she too passed away quietly in her sleep. Standing in the funeral home arranging my grandmother's service, I felt utterly alone. My parents were there, looking older, smaller, and more worn down than I remembered. At one point, my mother approached me, her voice softer than I'd ever heard. "Charlotte, do you need any help with the arrangements?" Part of me wanted to tell her to stay out of it, to remind her how little she'd cared for me growing up. But as I looked into her tired face, something in me softened. "Sure," I said, against my better judgment. "That would be nice." In the days after the funeral, my parents began opening up in ways they never had before. One afternoon, as we were picking out flowers for my grandmother's grave, my father admitted quietly, "We're not doing well financially, Charlotte. Ever since retiring, it's been tight." He stared down at the bouquet in his hands. "And with Veronica and the kids living with us?" I nodded, unsure what to say. A week after we buried my grandmother, we gathered in a paneled office for the reading of her and my grandfather's will. My parents, Veronica and Jason, sat on one side of the room. I sat alone on the other, clutching a tissue so tightly it nearly shredded in my hands. Mr. Collins, the family lawyer, adjusted his glasses and began reading. I expected the usual legal jargon, but when he reached the part about me, the entire room seemed to freeze. "To our beloved granddaughter Charlotte," he read, "we leave our house at 218 Willow Lane and the sum of $150,000. For a few seconds, nobody breathed. My mother's fingers tightened around my father's arm until her knuckles went white. Veronica stared at me like I'd just stolen something from her. Mr. Collins cleared his throat and continued. There's also a personal note from Mr. Henry Whitaker to his daughter, Linda. It reads, "Remember, Linda, that we gave you $200,000 when you needed it most. Just as we respected your needs back then, we expect you to respect our final wishes now." My mother's face turned red, then ashen. Veronica and Jason exchanged worried glances, and my father stared silently at the floor. After the will was read, my parents approached me in the parking lot. My mother's voice trembled as she pleaded, "Charlotte, honey, we always thought we'd inherit the house. We were counting on it. We have the mortgage. Veronica and the girls need space. Please, you can't just take it." My father chimed in, his voice trembling, talking about how the twins deserved a yard to play in. Even Veronica joined in, though her eyes never quite met mine. I didn't say much. I just climbed into my car and drove off, the folder containing the deed clutched tight in my lap. As I drove back to the city, my mind spun with the realization that my grandparents had known exactly what might happen. Their final act of love was giving me something that no one else could claim, my own space, my own security. But I also knew deep down that this was far from the end of the story. In the weeks after the reading of the will, my life felt like it was split between two worlds. In one, I was Charlotte Whitaker, successful senior manager at one of the biggest investment banks on Wall Street, respected and financially secure. In the other, I was still the forgotten daughter, tangled in the chaos of my family's dysfunction. Though I lived in the city and kept my distance, I couldn't ignore the fact that my parents were in trouble. I learned, through bits of conversation and the occasional slip from Veronica, that my parents were barely keeping up with their mortgage payments. The constant support for Veronica's family had drained them dry. The house my grandparents left me on Willow Lane was beautiful, a warm, cozy two-story place with a big backyard and the faint scent of my grandmother's vanilla candles still clinging to the curtains. It was filled with memories of after-school lessons, holiday dinners, and quiet evenings solving math problems at the kitchen table. But it was also far too big for just me, and the echoes of loss inside those rooms were sometimes too loud to bear. So I started thinking. With the money from selling the Willow Lane house, plus a portion of my own savings, I could buy my parents a new home, something smaller, easier for them to maintain in retirement, with a yard for the twins to play in, a place where they could breathe, free from the financial weight crushing them. The idea felt right. It felt like a way to honor my grandparents' memory and maybe, just maybe, to start fresh with my parents. When I finally sat down with them to explain my plan, I felt my heart pounding in my chest. "I want to help you," I told them. "I'm planning to sell Grandma and Grandpa's house. I'd like to use the proceeds, plus some of my own money, to buy you a smaller home that's more manageable. One story, no stairs, a nice yard, somewhere peaceful." For a moment, silence hung between us. Then my mother burst into tears. My father, usually so stoic, wiped at his eyes. "Oh, Charlotte," my mother sobbed, grabbing my hands across the table. That's more generous than we could ever have imagined." My father cleared his throat. "We'd love that. Truly. We're so proud of you, and this would be such a relief." For a few fleeting days, I felt hopeful. We started house hunting together, driving through quiet neighborhoods. My parents seemed genuinely happy as they explored floor plans and peeked into backyards. My mother started dreaming out loud about garden beds and holiday dinners. My father talked about how much easier a one-story home would be for his aching knees. Finally, we found it. A charming ranch-style house in a peaceful suburb with wide doorways, bright windows, and a lovely little garden out back. It felt like the kind of home where they could finally rest after decades of stress. When we closed on the house, my parents hugged me, tears shining in my mother's eyes. "We'll have a proper housewarming party, Charlotte," my dad said, clapping me on the shoulder. "It's the least we can do to thank you. We want to show everyone how wonderful our daughter is." My mother nodded eagerly. Yes, we'll make it special. Just give us a little time to get settled. I smiled, my heart lighter than it had been in years. I thought, naively, that maybe this was our chance to finally bridge the gap between us. That my parents were ready to see me not as the afterthought, but as the daughter who'd helped them find stability. I didn't know then how wrong I was, or how deeply my generosity would be twisted into yet another chapter of betrayal. For weeks after closing on the new house, I waited for my parents to call about the housewarming party. I kept checking my phone, half excited, half nervous. It felt like a fresh chapter, a chance to finally be part of the family in a way I'd never been before. But the calls never came. Every time I reached out, my parents gave vague excuses. "Oh, we're still planning," my mother would say breezily. "These things take time." My father would echo, "We want it to be perfect, Charlotte. We'll let you know soon." At first, I accepted it. They were older, overwhelmed, maybe just tired. But as the weeks dragged on, a nagging suspicion began crawling up my spine. Something wasn't right. Then, one evening, after yet another evasive phone call from my mother, I found myself staring at my laptop. On a whim, I typed Veronica Whittaker into Facebook's search bar. We hadn't connected on social media in years. She'd unfriended me ages ago, probably during one of her many reinventing herself phases. But her profile was public enough for me to see recent posts. And there it was. A photo album titled Mom and Dad's Housewarming Party, this Saturday. My stomach dropped. There were photos of caterers setting up tables, strings of fairy lights being draped over the fence, and my parents standing in the middle of the living room smiling like movie stars. Dozens of friends and relatives had commented, "Can't wait to see the new place. So happy for your parents, and for you, Veronica. Your family deserves it." I scrolled further and saw Veronica's caption. "So excited for this weekend's housewarming party for Mom and Dad. Can't wait to celebrate in their gorgeous new home." I sat frozen for a minute, trying to process what I was seeing. They were throwing a huge party in the house I bought for them, and I hadn't even been invited. My fingers shook as I dialed my mother's number. "Hi, Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I just wanted to check if you've picked a date for the housewarming yet." "Oh, not yet, sweetheart," she replied smoothly. "We're still figuring things out. You know how these things are." I felt like I might scream. "Right, okay, let me know," I said, hanging up before my voice cracked. As Saturday approached, I felt torn. Part of me wanted to pretend it wasn't happening. Another part burned with curiosity and anger. On the day of the party, I drove over and parked a block away from the house. From my car, I could see lights glowing through the windows. Music floated into the street. Guests milled around in the yard, holding glasses of champagne. My father was giving people tours of the house. My mother, dressed in her special occasion pearls, stood at the door greeting visitors. Through the living room window, I saw moving boxes stacked neatly in the corner. Veronica's handwriting was scrawled across each one. A realization hit me like a slap. They were moving Veronica and her family into the house. I sat there for nearly 20 minutes, my pulse pounding in my ears. Then I slipped out of my car, walked around the block, and quietly entered through the side door. Inside, the smell of catered food and flowers hit me like a wall. Voices floated in from the living room. As I got closer, I heard my father announcing, "After all these years of hard work, we finally bought our dream home," my mother chimed in, practically glowing. "And don't forget Veronica. She helped so much with the down payment. She's such a wonderful daughter, always thinking of family first." Someone asked about me, and my mother said, with a dismissive laugh, "Oh, Charlotte's too busy with her career to care about family. She hasn't helped us at all." It was like every insult from my childhood condensed into a single moment. Heat rose up my neck. I stepped into the doorway and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Actually, I think you've got that backwards." The entire room went dead silent. Faces turned toward me. My father blinked, looking like he'd seen a ghost. My mother's smile collapsed. Veronica paled and clutched her glass of wine. And in that instant, I knew the real confrontation was only just beginning. For several long seconds, nobody moved. It was as though the music, the chatter, the clinking of glasses, all of it had vanished into thin air. All eyes were on me. My father was the first to speak. He forced a tight smile, as if hoping he could smooth things over with sheer politeness. "Charlotte, what a surprise. We didn't expect you tonight." I crossed the threshold into the living room, my pulse roaring like thunder in my ears. "Funny, Dad. I didn't expect to be excluded from the housewarming party for the house I bought." A ripple of shock went through the room. People started glancing at one another, whispering behind their hands. Veronica shifted closer to my mother, her face flushed. Jason stood awkwardly beside her, trying to corral the twins, who were now peeking out from behind Veronica's dress, eyes wide. My mother's voice cut through the murmurs, sharp and brittle. "Charlotte, don't make a scene. This is a family gathering." I stared at her. "A family gathering? In the house I paid for? The one you told everyone you bought yourselves?" My mother lifted her chin, her pearls glinting under the chandelier. "Well, we live here now, and Veronica and her family need stability. It only made sense." My father stepped in, his voice pleading. "Honey, listen. The twins need space. Veronica and Jason are starting over. This house is perfect for them. You don't have kids. You don't need all this space." Veronica finally found her voice. "Charlotte, you can't expect eternal gratitude just because you bought a house. Mom and Dad deserve comfort in their old age, and my kids need a home." My jaw tightened. I planned to give it to Mom and Dad officially tonight. I was going to sign over the deed as a gift. I thought maybe we could finally start over. But instead, you planned an entire party and lied to everyone about how you paid for this place. My mother let out a scoffing laugh, though her eyes were wild. "What's done is done. We've already moved in. We've invited everyone here. You can't embarrass us like this." "I'm not embarrassing you," I snapped. "I'm telling the truth." With shaking hands, I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder. I flipped it open and held it high so everyone could see the documents inside. "This," I said, my voice trembling but clear, "is the deed to this house. My name is the only one on it. I never signed it over to anyone." My mother's complexion turned from pink to white in a matter of seconds. My father opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "But we assumed—" "You assumed wrong," I said. Veronica took a step toward me, eyes blazing. "You're being selfish. You're tearing this family apart." "No, Veronica. You and Mom and Dad tore it apart years ago." My voice broke as the memories slammed into me all at once. Being ignored at dinner tables, scrubbing toilets while my sister practiced violin, hearing that my parents saw potential only in her. "I was invisible in this family my entire childhood," I continued, my voice rising. "I cooked your meals, cleaned your house, and got nothing but excuses when it came time for my college education. Meanwhile, Mom and Dad spent all their money on your wedding and bailed you out again and again. And now, you want to steal the house I bought for them and lie to all these people about it?" A hush fell over the room so heavy it felt like suffocating air. My mother's voice turned shrill. "We're your parents. We have rights." I shook my head. "No, you're the people who gave birth to me. My grandparents were my real parents. They're the ones who taught me what family means, and who taught me enough about finances to make sure that this house stays in my name." She reached out, as if to touch my arm. "Charlotte, please." I pulled back. "It's over." Turning to the crowd, I raised my voice. "I'm sorry, everyone, but this party is over. You all have to leave, now." A stunned silence followed. Then, slowly, guests began gathering their things, casting uneasy glances at my parents. Someone scooped up a plate of untouched shrimp cocktail. Another woman slipped out, heels clicking on the hardwood floor. Veronica's twins started crying, confused and scared. Jason tried to hush them as he led them toward the door. My father gave me one last look, eyes glassy with unshed tears. How could you do this to your own family? He whispered. I swallowed hard. Because I finally learned that family isn't about blood, it's about respect, and I deserve that much. And just like that, the house emptied out, leaving me standing alone among half-empty champagne flutes and plates of fancy hors d'oeuvres. It wasn't the way I'd wanted things to end. But deep inside, I knew there was no other way. In the days after that disastrous party, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. At first, it was my mother leaving messages, crying, raging, accusing me of humiliating them in front of the entire family. You've become so cold, Charlotte. Just like your grandparents warned us you would. How could you do this to your own flesh and blood? My father's voice followed, steadier but weary. Honey, can't we work this out? We're family. We just want everyone to be happy. Then came Veronica's texts, pages of pleading words. Please don't punish my kids for my mistakes. The girls deserve a stable home. We're family, Charlotte. Don't turn your back on us now. At first, I read every message, hoping for some sign that they'd finally understand. That they'd say the words I'd waited my whole life to hear. That I mattered to them, not for what I could do, not for what I could give, but simply because I was their daughter and sister. But those words never came. Instead, each voicemail, each text, dripped with the same old undertones of obligation and guilt. Not true remorse, not real change. Just desperation to preserve the story they'd always told, that I was the selfish one, the cold career woman who refused to care about her family. Eventually, I blocked their numbers, deleted the emails, logged off social media. I stood in the empty house for the last time about a month later. The echoes of the party still seemed to linger in the walls, as though laughter and music had been burned into the paint. Half-peeled streamers lay forgotten in the corners. A single pink balloon floated against the ceiling, bobbing slightly in the breeze from the HVAC vent. I ran my hand along the kitchen counter, remembering my grandmother baking cinnamon rolls there, the flour dusting the floor as she taught me how to knead dough. I stood in the living room, picturing my grandfather reading me financial reports and telling me, "Numbers never lie, Charlotte. People do, but numbers never do." And I realized something I'd never fully admitted to myself. This house was a beautiful part of my past, but it could not heal the wounds my parents had carved into me. It could not turn us into a family we'd never truly been. So, I called a real estate agent. I sold the house. I took the money and put some of it toward my own future, a future I finally felt free to design on my own terms. People sometimes ask me whether I'd ever try to reconcile with my parents, whether I'd forgive them. I've come to understand that forgiveness isn't always about inviting people back into your life. Sometimes, forgiveness is about letting yourself walk away without guilt. It's giving yourself permission to choose peace over chaos. When I think about my childhood now, I no longer feel only anger. I feel sadness. For the little girl who spent so many nights wishing her parents would look at her the way they looked at her sister. For the teenager who had to run away just to be able to breathe. And yes, I feel grief for what could have been. But I also feel gratitude for my grandparents, who loved me without condition and believed I was worth something even when no one else did. For the life I've built for myself. For the freedom I now have to decide who deserves a place in it. I made myself a promise the night I deleted my mother's last unread email. Someday, when I have children of my own, they will never have to wonder whether they are wanted. They will never have to earn my love or compete for my attention. I will love them just as my grandparents loved me, steadily, fiercely, without strings attached. A few weeks after selling the house, I drove past the small apartment complex where my parents now live with Veronica and her family. I saw the twins playing in the tiny courtyard, chasing each other around a patch of grass barely big enough for a picnic blanket. For a split second, my chest ached with something like sorrow. But it wasn't sorrow for the family I'd left behind. It was sorrow for the idea of a family I'd never truly had in the first place. I pulled away from the curb, steering back toward the city and the life I'd built. My grandparents were right. Sometimes the best things in life aren't planned. And sometimes, walking away is the healthiest thing you can do. Because love isn't just blood or obligation. It's respect. It's kindness. It's choosing each other over and over again. And as for me, I'm done being the afterthought in my own story. From now on, I'm the author.